everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome here if you're new. So in this video, I'm going to share with you the tutorial for my mini sunflower template. It's a new template that I've been working on. I've been posting it on Instagram sort of as a teaser, and a lot of people were interested. So because of that, I feel that I have actually rushed this template out a little bit quicker. Normally I would have this tutorial first, then the template, but that was kind of flipped. I am going to talk a lot in this video. This is not one of those videos that you can just sit and get the gist of it for a while, mostly because I'm sharing how I use the template itself. Making the flower is actually fairly easy. I've made sunflowers before. I mean, the gist of it is fairly easy. You have petals and then you have a center. I'm going to talk a lot about how to make the sunflower with my specific template in this video. And so I'm going to try to leave timestamps down in the description box. I'm going to organize the information in a certain way that would best suit you, because I'm trying to capture a lot of different topics in this one video, because everyone has different backgrounds, and so maybe some people have a cutting machine and some don't. It's not like the rose template where you just kind of bang it together. So because of that, that's sort of a disclaimer. This video will be long. Check the timestamps down below if you are in a rush or you're not interested in a lot of this information. So to start, for this template there are 5 different styles. So I've cut them all out here. These are all 4.5 inches wide, and I've labeled them. So here is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now the easy thing would have been just to give you one template style, one way to make it, and then that's it. That would probably have been the easiest thing for me as a template designer, whatever you call it, just to give one option. But that's kind of not how I am. I like to have options, I like to play around, and there are different ways that you can make a flower that if you just tweak it a certain way, you get the result that you like. And that's kind of what I'm going after. So I'm trying to appease the person that is making flowers so that they're happy with what they make. And so the reason why there's 5 is that there's slight differences between each shape. However, it's all the same basic shape that I've manipulated and formed a certain petal for each piece here. So the first 2 shapes here are what I call my smaller center petal or piece. The center here is much smaller. The key difference obviously is the petals. So this one is a thinner petal, this one is a wider petal. Sometimes you may want to do less, you want more. You can change up the different look and get different looking flowers, and so I thought I'd do one that was thinner and one was wider. They both have the same size center when you're cutting out between. So this one is 4.5 and this one is 4.5. This center size here is the same between these 2. Now comparing these 2 and these 3, the centers here are actually larger. Some people commented that they like a larger center. And originally this was my first sunflower that I made. This is like my early beta version. I made one that had a smaller center and then a very easy, not very detailed flower center. So the spacing was smaller, similar to this, and then the center itself was sort of very easy and not as detailed. And then someone mentioned that sunflowers should have larger centers, and I actually agreed after looking at photos of real sunflowers. So I thought, okay, I'll make larger centers here, but I thought I'd include the option. So this would kind of be like the express sunflower. If you are crunched for time, you don't have enough paper, you don't want to spend the time to do it, you can obviously use this and still get that sunflower look here with less work. And so that's what I would say use these 2 for. Petals 3, 4, and 5, or the style 3, 4, and 5. I think I use that interchangeably. Again, this is a thinner petal, a wider petal, and this is slightly wider and also less petals per piece. And so that is why I made it that way, just in case, so that you can have different options for whatever project you're making. So if you're making a lot, maybe go for this one or this one, depending on, how much time you have and what look you're going for. And so those are the options for the petal styles, and so 5 of them. So next, what's included is 2 styles for the center. So generally this is an SVG, PNG, or silhouette cut file. I'm naming this center 1 and then center 2, and there's 4 sizes of each. And so I've created the same shape, and I've So 4 sizes here, and then I'm just gonna arrange this here. Okay, so there are 2 styles as mentioned and 4 sizes of each, and the reason is because I have to think about people who want to make small flowers and those who want to make large flowers. So I wanted to make it so that those who wanted to make small flowers or those who want to make large flowers can use the same template and the same files, but without having to sort of adjust or make any sort of inconvenience with resizing the files and then having to put together this flower. And so the main thing about a sunflower is the center, and so there are a lot of pieces, and if I only gave you just one SVG, let's say for instance this one here for a small flower, if I wanted to make it larger, something that looks like this, you would find it difficult to cut this out as one piece. In order to get it to look like this for a large size flower, you would have to draw out the sizing, and this would end up being larger than a 12 by 12 or 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and then you would have to deal with maybe even cutting smaller pieces of the same SVG. So the reason why 4 are included is that you can use this one for a small flower or this one for a larger flower or even greater than this size without having to mess with the file itself. It just makes it a little bit easier. If I had made them even smaller, you might have to cut out tiny pieces like this, but maybe 100 of them, and nobody wants to do that. And so the reason why there are 4, and I says it 1, 2, 3, 4, is for that. So those who want to make larger flowers would tend to go for a size 3 or 4. Those who want to go for a smaller flower would use size 1 and 2, and that's the same with this piece here. So this here, I've included sort of as an option. It's this outer piece here, sort of like a halo around the center. This can or cannot be used, and the same sort of principle applies. You use smaller or size 1 for smaller flowers and size 4 for larger flowers. And that's why there's 4 different files in terms of sizing, but they're all the same, and that's just so that you can make small flowers or large flowers, whatever you wish. I'll talk more about which file to use and how to size the flower as I'm making the flower because I am talking so much. And so in terms of making this flower, there really isn't a whole lot that you have to think about. It's basically get the leaves, make the center. That's sort of the breakdown of it. So here, this is what I consider my small size flower. This is a medium and this is a large, and that's just within this sizing. You can obviously go smaller or larger based on whatever you'd like to make. So this one is 7.5 inches wide in total. I am keeping it at that size because letter size paper or 8.5 by 11 piece of paper is generally what you can find, so I wanted to make that be large. Not everyone has access to 12 by 12 size cardstock. So in terms of sizing, this is what I'm calling my small, medium, and large, and I'm trying to fit within an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. Not everyone has access to 12 by 12 size cardstock, and so this is what I'm calling my small, medium, large. If you have a cut machine, you can definitely go beyond this size. You can make them smaller or larger, whatever you wish. This one is a 4.5 inch wide flower. This is a 6 inch wide flower, and this is a 7.5 inch wide flower. And I'm gonna go ahead and just get started with making a flower. And I'm gonna use the large size just because it's easier to see on camera. And in terms of what style petal this is style 4. So these here are actually style 3. So I used a thinner petal for these. This one I wanted something a little bit thicker so that, number one, you could see it on the camera easier, and there's less petals, so it doesn't take as much time. Okay, so the petals that I'm being using for this flower, or again, this one here, this is the example that I'm making. It's 7.5 inches wide, 7.25 or 7.25 inches wide, and then 7 inches wide for the smallest layer. I have 2 pieces of each. So when I glue these together, I consider that one layer. So you have 3 layers of petals, but 6 petals total. And I am using 1/4 inch increments in the petal sizes for a specific reason. So if I just use this flower here, for example. So the flower center here, when you have such tight sizing, what it does, especially when you do anything to the petals to give it a little bit of dimension, is that the petals here, or that petal layer, gets pushed up from the layers from beneath it. And the reason why we want that is so that it could frame the outer edge of your flower center, and it kind of hides that base. And so if I could just peel back the flower, it hides that center there, so the bottom portion. So you don't really want to see that. By having these petals sit upright and close to the center, it hides it and it frames it nicely, makes it look more like a real life flower. So that's why the sizing is so tight between sizes. You could, if you wanted to, just use 1/2 inch increments or size it however you like, based on your preferences, but in the template file, you can use any 3 consecutive sizes. And so I've named them usually petal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. I believe there are 16 petals per style. You could just choose any 3 consecutive numbered petals. So you could do 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. So just, it's very clear, you could just choose any 3 sizes that you want. And in terms of actually putting together this flower, it is super easy. All I do is actually just fold the petal in half to give it a little bit of sort of dimension to it so that it doesn't look like just a flat flower. So I fold it in half like this. I give it a little bit of a crease with my fingernail, and then I open it up. So that's it. I really don't spend a whole lot of time doing anything to the petals. I also do just bend it back like this. So I just bend it so that you can get sort of a circle around. But one thing I will say is that be gentle when you're doing this, especially if you're using thinner cardstock. So I am using 65-pound cardstock. It's generally sturdy, but when you're working like this with the petals, there is a tendency to rip at the edges here. So if you're doing it, try to be a little careful. Sometimes what I do is also I'll just bend that circle that's the base and then fold. If I'm moving too quickly, there is a tendency for me to rip the petals, and so that's something to be mindful of. You don't want to cut out all your petals and then have one rip, and as for me at least, it would bug me immensely. So I just fold. You could, if you want, you can use something to crease it, but using my fingernails works as well. And then I do that for every single petal here. You can see why I chose one that has less petals for this video. I don't want to spend hours. I certainly don't want to spend hours just folding these petals here, but generally I do it a lot quicker when I'm actually making them on video or on camera. I am trying to be a little bit more mindful, and I am only just going to about 3/4 of the petal, so that much of the petal underneath does not get folded. It's okay because you don't want to rip that petal off of your base here. So I increasing about 3/4 of this petal and then just moving on. Generally for sunflower, what you're really after is that flower center that's sort of stunning, and so there doesn't need to be a lot of treatment to the petals itself. So I am going to bend all of these back and open up the petal. So that is my first layer. This is my smallest layer. I'm going to do that for all of these petals here, and then they'll be in the next frame. You do not want to sit here and watch all of that. Okay, so once you have your petals prepped, it's just a matter of putting together the layers and then gluing the layers together. And so what I do is I add glue to the entire rim of the center here. If I do add glue in the center, I do something like that, but I try to cover as much area as possible without filling the entire thing with glue. And then what I do is I take the top layer, or the top piece, and then I glue that in between the layer below, so in between the petals from the layer before. And then that is one layer, and then just putting all of these together. Now the reason why I add glue to the entire outside is I have made them before where I just added a little bit of glue so that it's stuck, but then it dries unevenly because the glue doesn't dissolve itself, it sort of just hardens. And so when you have it around at least the entire edge of this circle base here, it sticks better so it doesn't like warp in the middle. So I just found that that was an easier thing to do, just to add glue at least around the edge of that base here. Okay, so then now just gluing the layers together. So this is my largest, smallest, and that's the middle. I just want to get them right. The sizing is very close, so I don't want to accidentally glue the wrong layer together. So I find it easier sometimes just to do this with my petals so that I see the base. I'm going to add glue around the entire rim of that base. And then I take any petal as my guide. So if I choose that one, I want to glue that in between the layer, or in between the petals from the layer below. You'll just want to move slightly inward. So if I just look at the edge here, I want to go just slightly in more because this petal is slightly smaller. That way it's centered in the middle. And then I'll do the same with this last piece here. This just helps so that I know that I'm right in the middle, because you don't want to glue too much to one side. It will sort of warp it. Not the worst thing in the world. At least you could at least pull it off and then re-glue it. But you can see, because of that sizing, the petals in the middle naturally come up. That helps because I did crease it here. I bent the petals where the base is. But because the layers underneath, it pushes this layer here up and upright so that you can add a center, and it kind of closes very nicely. So it naturally does that for you, so that helps. So now that I have this finished, I can just set this aside. This was the easiest part. I'm going to now talk about the center. So for the flower center, because I'm making the large size, I do have a huge ton of flower center pieces. Okay, so I have, I believe, 48 here, but I will talk about how much you likely will need per size, and I'm going to add a reference sheet of general sort of recommendations for each size and how to size it. Okay, so one of the things is I don't like to give concrete sizing examples because everyone has different preferences. And so one thing you can do is you can have a center in here that's smaller, so they can just be very short centers, or they're really thin and then they can be really close to the center, or they can be fairly tall. So if I use this as an example, if you look at the flower, it's actually fairly tall. Like, that's a very tall center. It's not as tall as the tallest petal here, but it's fairly tall in terms of how much it sticks out from the bottom of the base. You could have the same effect with a shorter center that doesn't sit as tall. It would still look the same, it would just look a little more sunken in, right? So here, this one looks a little more sunken in than this one. So this one, the center is a little more prominent, and this middle-sized one, it sinks a little bit lower. So I'm giving you examples or recommendations in sort of range for each size, but you can choose whatever you like based on how you like. The centers that sit closer to the bottom of the flower, that makes any sense, that uses less paper and it looks more sunken in, and maybe you like that look. But maybe you want it to be more prominent, you want it closer to the top of the flower. It does use more paper, but it has maybe a nicer effect. So I don't like to give exact numbers. I just like to give a range, and I have you choose. You honestly can't go wrong. I would say make one and decide how you like it best. If you prefer to conserve paper, you don't really care, as long as it looks as it does head on, then you can do as you wish. So in making your flower, once you put together the petals itself, the way that I like to gauge how tall I want my center to be is I look at the height of the smallest petal. So this is the smallest petal, and it's the smallest layer. So I don't want that flower center to be taller than this petal here. I want it to be shorter. So what I've done before is I stuck a ruler in here and I gauged that. I know that I want it to be about an inch tall and no more, or just around that size, but I don't want it to be obviously 2 inches tall. If you have a smaller flower, that height of the smallest petal is obviously shorter, so you want that to be smaller. So one trick is, when you're making this flower, decide, how tall you want that flower to sit up. And so I can't find my ruler for the life of me, but I have sized this to 1 inch. And the way the SVGs or any other file is set up is that you care about the width of this shape, but obviously if you rotate the file, this will be now the height and this would be the width. And so when I talk about the width or I talk about the measurement of this flower center, I really only care about this dimension here because you want to cut them in long strips. That's sort of the best way to conserve paper in most instances. So I want this to stick up 1 inch tall, and if I put that in here, if I just slowly just wrap this like that, I know that it won't be taller than the shortest petal here, and it fits nicely in, so 1 inch is good for me. Again, I am using size 3 for this flower center here, but I will give a reference sheet and I'm going to attach it down below and include it in the files. So those of you who might have already purchased it, you can download it from down below in the description box. If you are buying it after this video, that should be included within the files. So the next question is, how many pieces do I cut out? And that's a question that's really hard to answer. It depends a lot on what size you're using. If you're using the best size file for you, if you're cutting tiny pieces, larger pieces, you can imagine that those numbers will vary, and it depends on how wide you want your centers. Maybe you like yours a little bit less if you're also using style 2 or 1 versus style 3, 4, and 5. You'll use less number of pieces here. So I do give a general range in that reference sheet that I'll be including. But in general, for a small size flower, the number of pieces here is about 15 to 20. This one in the middle is about 25 to 30, and then the largest size is anywhere from 35 to 40, 42. If you want more, you want them fuller, obviously add more. Here I have actually about 45 pieces, only because I used 12 by 12 paper and I just threw a bunch on the sheet and had them all cut out. So I didn't cut out a specific number, I just filled up the number of sheets that I had. One thing too is sometimes you might have thicker paper. So this one's actually fairly thin. I can bend it very easily and it's not hard to cut. It can go in one pass on my cutting machine. And so this is what I would say 65-pound cardstock, but sometimes it's hard to find good shades of brown in a lightweight cardstock. So sometimes you might have a thicker cardstock sometimes you might have a thicker cardstock that would require less because there's more bulk to make up that center. So again, those numbers that I'm giving would be just recommendations. So just to bring back these, this is my size 1 file. This is what it looks like when these are all sized to 10.5 inches tall. So that is sort of the common size between all of these. So this is 10.5 by different measurements. Size 1 is what I use for a small. Size 2 is what I would use for a medium. Size 3 is what I would use for a large in this sense. And then I have a size 4, and this is for people who want to cut out a sunflower using a 12 by 12 piece of cardstock. This can be sized larger, and then this is probably best used for any size any size flower that you want to make larger than that, or if you just like a really, really tall center. So if I took this and I put this in here, it is still shorter than my shortest petal or my smallest petal here. So you could use it. It's not really a make or break. It's kind of up to preference, but generally this one would be what you would use for the largest size, greater than 8.5 by 11 cardstock, whatever you can fit more than that. In general, for a large size flower, as I am saying here, I would say size this about 1 inch to 1.25 inches. And so this one is actually just at 1 inch. It sits where I want it, but a good general rule is at least 1 to 1.25. So that fits nicely there. The sheet will have those numbers there for you to reference, to see what size you should cut your flower centers, about how many, and which one to use. So again, I have about 45 pieces here for the center, and I may use them all, I may not. I kind of just have this as a reserve or a pile that I draw from. I will talk about this piece next, but after I make this together. So again, I'm gonna stop and pause really quick. Making this was super easy. So once you cut out the shapes, you prep the petals and glue it together, this is done. The next part is figuring out the center. Once you figured out the sizing and how much, it's actually just a breeze to make. All you do is just put them together. And so what I do is I actually take reverse tweezers, and then I clamp the end, and then I just start twisting, and this starts my flower center for me, because it is sometimes a little difficult to roll that first part. So I let that start my flower center. And all that it really is just rolling. So you can imagine if you're making a lot of these sunflowers that you could just make a huge basket full and just start rolling and watch TV, watch a movie, watch a motivational YouTube video, whatever you like, and just start rolling. It's not difficult to make this flower, it's just labor intensive. And that's the way it was with the larger sunflower that I had before, my template number 7. I made it a couple years ago. There was so many petals, and then the flower center was a pain because it just required so many pieces. And this is the same. So here I'm just rolling out, and I'm just going to add until I get to the size that I want. There's really no shortcuts here. I wish I had really long pieces of paper so that I could cut longer strips. Sometimes we're just limited to what we have, and that's okay. One thing you can do to make it go a little faster is that there are little tabs at the end of each piece, and you can connect those. It doesn't matter how much it overlaps, since you're rolling it all together and you can't really tell when they're all rolled together. All you need to do is just overlap it. You don't really have to be careful. So if you did this, it really wouldn't change much. But if you just do tab to tab and then just create a long chain, that sometimes helps. That way you don't have to keep stopping and picking up a new piece. And it helps the rolling go by a lot quicker when you do it this way. Or at least I feel like it does. Because obviously it takes time for me to add this chain here. So then once I have a good number of them, I add a little bit of glue to what I started. And then I just roll. And then every few inches or so, maybe 6, 7 inches, or even every piece, what I do is I just add a little drop of glue. Not too much, but that helps keep the center in place. And also, when you add too much glue to the center, it gets very bulky and hard to roll and hard to manipulate. So I try to avoid adding too much glue. And one other thing is, it also can depend on how tightly you roll it. So I'm not rolling it very tightly. It's just not necessary, I think. When you put it together, it doesn't really show that you've rolled it tightly or not. And if you roll it a little loose or just let it glide without pulling it, you essentially use less pieces. And so that's something to consider. Sometimes some people like a really tight center so that that center doesn't budge, but I don't really mind because it all gets glued down anyway. So see, that's the start. That was, I think, if I were to remember, that's about 6 pieces. So you can see I still have a long ways to go, and I'm going to do that off camera, and the next frame will be close to being done just because you don't have to see me roll. Okay, so now that I'm done with the center, I actually ended up using every single piece just because I had it. I wasn't going to be using it for anything, at least not immediately, so I thought I would just use all of them. And when I place it in here, you can see it fills up most of this center area here. So this is where you could stop if you wanted. You're tired of rolling, different centers around. This would be a nice place to stop. You can see that it fits nicely, and I would say that this is a sunflower. Now what I've been doing is I've been adding extra pieces on it, and so this outer portion here, typically they are not white. I just added in because I wanted to make it look a little bit different, and I just thought black wasn't the nice color to add, but black or some sort of very, very dark brown would be a good option here on the outside. I did do more of a cream, so this is a cream cardstock, not white, just to kind of lessen the stark difference between white and yellow. The problem is being able to find good cardstock colors, so you don't generally get a range, you just get a certain amount of colors, and there's a lot of difference in the color or even just the hue of the color in stores. And so unfortunately, because we don't have that, we work with what we have. And I just thought the black and brown was a little bit too stark of a color contrast for this one, so I chose this cream color cardstock. This piece here is my center 2, so this is the second piece that is included with the files, and this is meant just to sort of be a little halo around the center. And in terms of sizing this, it is similar to using the size for your flower center, the first piece. I used a size 3 for the large, so again, size 1, 2, and 3. I'm also using a size 3 for this piece here, should you choose to use it. And in terms of how to size this, what I do is, if this is 1 inch, which it is, if this is 1 inch, I want this piece here to be slightly above that. So 1 1/4 inches, 1 inch and 1/10, whatever you want. I just want that to be a little bit taller and it sits higher up. So I actually sized it to just slightly above 1 inch. It's actually 1.1 on my cutting machine, because what I can do too is, if somehow I made it too small, like here, because of the way that I glued it together, it's not all perfectly flat. That if you wanted to, you can always glue it a little bit higher to have it sit up. So it's not a huge deal if you size it to a certain size and it's too short. So you can always glue it a little bit higher. But I wanted it to sit a little bit lower at first, so that when I wrap it around, it looks like that. So you almost can't tell. But what happens is that you start pressing it back, and that's where you start to see a little bit of a difference. You could also just size it larger, so it's whatever your preference is. So here, I don't think I need to belabor the sizing on this. Again, there is a reference chart for this that would help. And I'm going to start gluing this piece here. In terms of the number of pieces, that's up to you. So if you just want a small little halo, you can use less. If you want a thicker one, again, use more, right? So in general, I would say 7 to 10 pieces for your large size. So I would say here, you know, about 3 to 5, 5 to 7, 7 to 10. So I am gluing it like that. So from here, all I do is just keep adding more and more pieces. I usually add about 4 or 5 to start. And I do try to overlap them just a little bit, so you can see that they are not sitting right on top of each other. Okay, so that is 2 pieces. This is number 3. And I think, just looking at it now, I'll add 1 more piece. Okay, and so here I like to just bend it back just to see what it looks like. I don't really want too much or too many pieces, but if you like that look, obviously go for it. So it's just a subtle, or it's meant to be just like a subtle transition between the center and the petals, so it just kind of breaks up some of that space. So I think that's a good amount for me. Sometimes I like this look where there's a ton, and then other times where I feel like I just want it to be a little more subtle. So what you can do if you have extra pieces is you can add glue. So I'm going to add a little bit of glue and then start it again. But this time glue it up a little higher. And then it gives you sort of a little bit wider of a, I'm going to just call it a halo around this flower center. So it's just a little more detail, I guess. So it makes it look like there's layers of these, which obviously there are. So it's a nice step to take to add in just a little more detail. And as you can see, I already actually had these pieces, and so it's nice just to be able to use them. You don't need to have exactly the right size. You could just glue them up a little bit higher than what you had done before. So now putting it in, you can see it fits in nicely, and it covers up a lot of that space, that transition in between the center and the petals here. So I'm going to go ahead and just glue it down. So I am adding a lot of glue because it's a fairly heavy center. There's a lot of pieces. I want to make sure that it doesn't fall out. And there you have it. This is the center for the sunflower. Okay, so next, what I'd like to talk really quickly about in this video is what are other options for flower centers. And so in this sunflower here, I actually just used what I like to call a fringe piece, which is not a fringe. It's not a fringe because a fringe means, at least to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that if I have one side that's unattached and I have all these like hanging pieces, that's really kind of what a fringe is. Which I guess if you fold it in half and then you have pieces like this, that could be a fringe. But for lack of better terminology, I'm going to call this a fringe piece. I've been calling that for years. And each time I'm like, I don't think that's the right term. So originally I had this type of center for this flower, but I thought I would do something a little more detailed, a little more lifelike. So I came up with this. But there are some people who maybe don't want to do this, or they like this look better, that a fringe piece like this would work really well. So a couple years ago, I did make a tutorial on how you can create your own piece like this in Silhouette Studio and in Cricut Design Space. And I think that the tutorial still applies, but there are some tips that I think would be better in making that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a separate video with this piece here. If you're interested in this, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to make several files, both in Silhouette and in Cricut Design Space, and I'll leave those links in that video, the description box. They'll be free downloadable files. I'll show you how I make them and also how I save them and customize them for any project that you're making. And so these will be free files. Give me a little bit of time to make this video. But essentially, once you create one master file, you can use it for any other project that you want just by opening it up, adjusting it to your project needs, cutting it out, and then exiting without saving, or you could save if you like and have multiple copies, whatever you like. That way you can always have something like this that's easy to create, and all you need to do is just adjust it to your project needs. So I'm going to do a separate video on that. That way this video won't be, 3 hours long. So that will be a separate video. I won't talk about it today, but if you're interested, if you have a Cricut and you want this piece now, just send me a message. I can send you that link so that you can try it out for yourself. But obviously, if you are cutting it out, you would just cut out the piece, and I would, at least for this video's purposes, you would make aware of how tall you want your flower center. So here again, I made them 1 inch tall. So you would want at least something that is 2 inches tall, because when you fold it, it'll be 2 inches wide, but 1 inch tall once you've folded it. And so if you're making something like this, that's kind of where you want to go with how much or how to size this piece for your project. Obviously, all you would do would be just to fold it in half and then you roll it up. Or I should say you fold it in half, add some glue, and then roll it up. And then you'll get something like this, and then you would just build upon it as wide as you'd like, maybe even as wide as this. The reason why this center is a lot easier, it does take some time to cut, but it's easier because it's folded, and so it almost doubles up, and then you theoretically need less pieces, right? It's still the same amount of paper, but less pieces, and so that's something that you might want to consider if you're in a rush. So that is one other option. So then the next question is, what if I don't have a cutting machine? And I hate to say it, but there aren't very many options for you. You have to hand cut. So for hand cutting, what you would do is something similar to this for this fringe piece, but you'd have to do it by hand. There's kind of no way around it. But again, doubling it up, so just taking a piece of paper and folding it. So I have my bone folder here. I like to crease it, and then just cutting each individual piece. And so the great thing about it is you don't need to cut it that deep, because all you're doing is rolling, that you really just need to cut it halfway at least. And you don't have to worry about how deep you're cutting it. If some lines are longer than others, it really doesn't matter. So you don't have to do these too intricately, and not necessarily uniformly, although that would be best. So if you have one of those scissors that is smaller, like a sewing pair of scissors, or these are craft scissors that are kind of like with the Cricut. So with scissors like this, these small scissors, it makes it easy to cut and not accidentally cut through. And you just cut all the way. You can also try doubling it up, although that does make it a little bit harder if your scissors are not sharp. So that also helps in minimizing time, especially for these sunflowers, because you have to cut so many. But maybe that's one of the reasons you can use the style 1 and 2 versus style 3, 4, and 5. You would just have to be careful not to hurt your hands in doing this. And you can always cut a bigger piece and then cut off any excess that you don't want. It's not the best option, but I still think it gives a nice effect. So I like to turn it over so it fluffs it up just a little bit. And then you can add glue and then just roll it. So it's not as nice and uniform as it would be if it was machine cut, but it's still pretty good for not having a cutting machine. Okay, so another thing that you can do is you could just take a piece of cardstock that's lighter to mimic this outer halo piece that I use for my center. Fold it in half and also cut triangles out of this. So what I'm going to do is I have it under this piece of paper, so hopefully you can tell. So then you could just cut triangles out. So just small triangles, don't go all the way to the edge. You can make them as thin or as wide as you like. And if you stack pieces together, obviously you can do more than one at once. And I'm being a little careful so I don't let the scissor get all the way to the edge and just cut the piece off. But one thing you can do is just cut from a larger piece and then cut it down later. So you can use a full size sheet and just cut the edge like this. And once you're done, you can cut off that piece and keep going, so you don't have to worry about cutting off the edge of the piece of paper here. So as you can see, it's not perfect, and I usually rush on camera. I would do a lot better job if I was taking my time and having a little bit of patience, but I just cut this piece off. One thing you can do is just open it up, because I did fold the piece of paper in half. Just cut that down the middle, and then use this to wrap around your flower center. Now it's not perfect and it doesn't look as appealing because it's such a small center, but you get the gist that this is something that you still could do very easily with a pair of scissors. And again, I do use less of this outer cream piece, and so you wouldn't need as many. Another option is also just to cut a piece that looks like this. So something that looks like this, if you'd like, cutting them very slowly until you get the hang of it. Little pieces like this out of a piece of cardstock. So you could just go slope down. They kind of look like little tops of the fences, like of fences. So this takes a little more detail and time, but it's obviously very much doable. After a while, you really get the hang of it. If I concentrate rather than talk and continue this tutorial, I would do it much nicer, but as it is, they're fairly uniform and fairly easy. You would just have to keep turning the piece, but I don't really mind it. It's not difficult, it's just a little more time consuming than we'd like, and if we had more time, we could dedicate to this. And again, you don't need very many, and if you're making a smaller one, you wouldn't need it this big or as many. So okay, so this is a piece. Again, I'm going to cut it down the middle, and you could even, if you wanted to, use this as your center, but I don't think you want to cut out 30 pieces of this at this size, or less, but it is an option. You can see that if rolled tightly, and if I made them a little bit better with larger or longer piece of cardstock, you're mimicking that center that's here. So it'll get there if I worked at it, but you can also use this as that outer portion around your flower center. Right. So It's not a great representation here, but I think you get the gist. All right, the last thing I want to talk about before I end this really long video, I feel like I've been making this for several hours, and I have. I just stop and I do so much. So one last thing I want to talk about is paper. Now, there are two options that I've been using. So this one here is called Mocha Divine. I purchased this from Joann's. It's their Coordinations American Crafts Mocha Divine cardstock. Again, this is purchased at Joann's when they had a 10 sheets for $2 sale, so each sheet was 20 cents. I can cut a large amount of centers from this, and so this is what I've been using for all of these centers here. So another option is Michael's Recollections Pack Spice Market, and so this is their 50-piece value pack, and Spice Market is just the name of this collection. And this brown here is just a beautiful brown. Online it looks a little red, but it's a nice rich chocolate brown, and I think it works really well with the sunflower. So this is what it looks like. I know the plastic's on, so it's hard to see, but it's actually a nice rich brown, and I think it goes well, so this is an option. The only problem is it's only 10 pieces per pack, but I think the other colors are also really nice colors to use for fall, so it's something you can probably save and just use this for the centers. Okay, so that is my tutorial for the sunflower. I feel like I'm missing something. I hope I mentioned enough. Actually, as I see it now, I wanted to share something. So this is actually style 3, and this is actually style 4. And it may not be as clear, it is to me as I'm looking at this, is that these were all made in style 3, and so I liked that one, and then I decided to make this one for the video because it has less petals, and I thought I can get through it quicker. But you can see there is a difference if you're looking closely at the leaves, and so this one has more of a focus on leaves because there are more petals here. The leaves here are petals. There's more here, so it looks a little bit more full, I guess, and this one has less leaves, and so I personally see a clear difference between these two. Essentially, they're the same. It doesn't matter what style you use, but there are options if you wanted it. Anyway, this is my mini sunflower template. Again, they were really meant to be very tiny, but I thought I'd make the range and so that everyone can see kind of what you can make. You can obviously make larger if you're using 12 by 12 cardstock. Let me know if you have any questions down below. I originally imagined this video to be super long, and that voice inside my head says, "Stop talking, Judy." So I hope I have covered everything. Again, I wanted to be more general than specific. There will be a reference sheet linked down below for you to download, or I can send it to you if you send me an email or a message on Etsy. Either way, I will ask for your email to send it to you. Let me know if that's something that you want. Anyway, I think this is a perfect flower for spring, especially summer, because sunflowers remind me of summer. I just remembered just now that I do have one more version I wanted to share. So there are a lot of different ways you can make a sunflower, and one of my favorite sunflowers are just the white ones, the ones that are more cream actually. And there are some that are in the fall that are more reddish, and those are lovely beyond just the yellow sunflowers. But this one here is supposed to be a white sunflower. And I've tried to make the flower center a little bit different. It has the same components, but I use different colors. So this is a cream cardstock. In the middle is black instead of this brown here. And what I did is I added a few pieces of just the same brown that's here in the middle to create a ring to try to simulate the look of the seeds that are in the middle. I think it helps. I'm not sure if it translates very well on camera, but then the halo here is brown, and so this was another take on the sunflower that you could make, and I'm sure there are a number of ways that some of you amazingly creative people can take this template and use to create your beautiful flowers. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. So hopefully that's clear. There is a ring in the middle that is brown, and that way it gives a little more detail. I really love this one. Just looking at it makes me happy. Okay, that is enough talking for one video. Let me know if you have any questions down below. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.